If someone had told me 10 years ago that my friendship with Leo would end up here, in the quiet hum of a Sunday morning with his arm thrown over my waist, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, but the sharp, brittle kind I used for things that hurt too much to be possible. Because for a decade, Leo was the sun, and I was just a planet caught in his orbit, content to circle in the cold, happy for the borrowed light. My life before was a study in beige. My apartment walls were beige, my clothes were mostly gray, my routine was a perfectly predictable loop of work, home, and solitude. I liked it that way, or I told myself I did. Solitude is safe. It builds no bridges, so none can ever burn. I worked from home, a graphic designer wrestling with logos and color palettes, my only company the low thrum of the refrigerator and the distant city traffic. It was a life built inside a fortress of my own making, and the walls were very, very high. I was an observer by nature, a chronicler of details no one else seemed to notice. The way the late afternoon sun hit the dust motes dancing in the air, the faint, almost invisible scar above a stranger's eyebrow, and of course, the details of Leo. Leo crashed into my life in college, a force of nature disguised as a business major. He was all broad shoulders and easy laughter, a supernova of confidence that drew people to him without effort. He sat next to me in a mandatory literature class, borrowed a pen, and never really gave it back. Instead, he gave me his friendship, a thing so bright and overwhelming I didn't know what to do with it. He was physically imposing, not in a threatening way, but in a way that just took up space. He owned every room he entered. His hands were large, calloused from years of working on old cars with his father. His voice was a low rumble that could soothe a crying child or cut through the noise of a crowded bar. To me, he was a collection of impossibilities. He was my best friend, and I was hopelessly, silently, achingly in love with him. The distance between us was a canyon, vast and uncrossable. Its name was Chloe. She was his girlfriend, a permanent fixture since his senior year. She was nice enough, I suppose. Pretty, bubbly, exactly the kind of person you'd expect to be orbiting a sun like Leo. She fit. I did not. Seeing them together was a special kind of torture I inflicted upon myself regularly. The casual way he'd loop an arm around her shoulders, the proprietary way she'd brush a piece of lint from his jacket. Each gesture was a tiny, perfect stab to my heart. My stomach would fill with a swarm of angry bees, a buzzing, acidic feeling that I'd have to swallow down with a forced smile. So I perfected my role, the quiet, supportive best friend, the third wheel, the reliable, non-threatening buddy. I listened to his problems with Chloe, offered neutral advice, and died a little inside every time he said her name with that soft, affectionate tone. My solitude was a comfort then, a place to retreat and lick my wounds in private. The fortress walls were good for that. The disruption came as disruptions often do on a Thursday. It arrived in the form of a text message from Leo. Cabin trip this weekend. You, me, Chloe, get packing. My heart did its usual frantic burden-the-ribs routine. A weekend, trapped with them, it sounded like hell, it sounded like heaven. Then a second text arrived. Update, Chloe's got that work thing she forgot about. Bylaid. So it's just you and me, man. Don't you dare cancel. Just you and me. The words hung in the air of my quiet apartment, shimmering with a dangerous kind of hope. It was a terrible, stupid hope, but it was there, a stubborn weed pushing up through the concrete of my carefully managed emotions. A weekend alone with him, it was unprecedented. The forced proximity began the moment I climbed into his ridiculously large truck. It smelled like him, a faint mix of sawdust, coffee, and something uniquely Leo. I was relegated to the passenger seat, a space usually occupied by Chloe. The air was thick with unspoken things, or maybe I was just projecting my own internal chaos onto the space between us. We drove for hours, leaving the city behind until the concrete and steel gave way to towering pines and winding mountain roads. He drove with an easy, one-handed confidence, his other arm resting on the open window. I watched the muscles in his forearm flex as he navigated a sharp turn, and I had to physically look away, my throat suddenly dry. The cabin was small, smaller than I'd imagined. It was one room, really. A compact kitchen area, a worn leather sofa, a stone fireplace, and in the far corner, a single, solitary queen-sized bed. One bed, my brain short-circuited. The bees in my stomach woke up and started a riot. I managed, my voice a croak. Where's the other? Leo shrugged, already hauling our bags inside. Sofa pulls out, it's not great, but it works. You can have the bed if you want. No, no, the sofa's fine, I said way too quickly. The thought of sleeping in a bed he was supposed to share with his girlfriend was somehow worse than the alternative. The sofa was neutral territory, safer. The first night was a masterclass in awkwardness. We built a fire, ate sandwiches, and talked about nothing. Work, sports, the weather. Every topic felt like a carefully chosen stone placed gently over the gaping chasm of what we weren't saying. I was hyper-aware of him, of every move he made. The way he stretched, his shirt riding up to reveal a sliver of skin above his jeans. The deep rumble of his laugh when I made a lame joke. I felt like a raw nerve, every inch of my skin buzzing with a painful sensitivity. Being near him was a physical thing, a magnetic pull I had to constantly fight. Later, as the fire died down to glowing embers, we sat in a silence that felt heavier than any conversation. It was a comfortable silence for him, I think. For me, it was a screaming void. I watched his profile in the flickering firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way the shadows carved hollows under his cheekbones. He looked tired. It was the first crack I'd ever seen in his sun-bright facade. There were faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, a slight slump to his usually perfect posture. He wasn't radiating confidence, he was just existing, quietly, wearily. "Everything okay?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He didn't look at me, he just stared into the dying fire. "Yeah, just stuff. Chloe's stuff?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Is there any other kind?" He finally turned his head, his eyes finding mine in the gloom. They looked dark, troubled. It feels like we're reading from different books, you know. Like I'm halfway through a chapter and she's already finished the novel and is mad I'm not at the same part." It was the most he'd ever admitted to me about his relationship. My heart, that traitorous organ, gave a painful lurch. A part of me, the ugly, selfish part, rejoiced. The other part, the part that loved him as a friend, ached for his sadness. "I'm sorry," I said, because it was the only true thing I could offer. He just nodded and the heavy silence returned, but it was different now. It was filled with his vulnerability, a fragile thing he had just handed me. It changed the dynamic between us. I wasn't just the observer anymore. I was the confidant, the keeper of a small, sad secret. The next day we went for a hike. The mountain air was crisp and clean, a welcome change from the emotional smog of the cabin. Leo seemed more himself out here, navigating the rocky trail with an innate grace. I, on the other hand, am not built for nature. I'm built for ergonomic office chairs and stable, level floors. Predictably, I slipped. My foot caught on a gnarled root, and for a split second I was airborne. Then gravity did its thing. I landed hard on my side, my hand scraping against a sharp rock to break my fall. A hot, searing pain shot up my arm. Leo was by my side in an instant, his face a mask of concern. "You okay?" "Fine," I gritted out, looking at my palm. It was a mess. A deep gash welling with blood, surrounded by angry red scrapes. "That's not fine," he said, his voice firm. He knelt and without asking, he took my wrist. The first touch. His fingers wrapped around my wrist, his thumb pressing lightly against my racing pulse. His skin was warm, his grip steady and sure. And my entire world tilted on its axis. Heat bloomed from the point of contact, a wildfire that tore through my veins, setting every nerve ending ablaze. My breath hitched. The pain in my hand was a distant echo compared to the supernova happening inside my chest. Shock, panic, a terrifying, exhilarating jolt of electricity. His focus was entirely on my hand. He didn't seem to notice my reaction, or if he did, he gave no sign. His brow was furrowed in concentration. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, because of course Leo is the kind of man who carries a handkerchief, and gently wrapped it around my palm, applying pressure. "We need to get this cleaned out," he said, his voice low and serious. He kept his hand on my wrist as he helped me to my feet. The walk back to the cabin was a blur. All I could feel was the circle of his fingers around my wrist. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was practical. It was first aid, but my body didn't know the difference. My body only knew that the person it had yearned for was touching me, and it was singing. Back at the cabin, he sat me down on the sofa and bustled around, finding the first aid kit. He was so competent, so in charge. He knelt in front of me, unwrapped the bloody handkerchief, and started cleaning the wound with an antiseptic wipe. I watched his face, the intense focus in his eyes, the slight frown of concentration on his lips. He was so close I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, count the individual eyelashes. He smelled like pine and clean mountain air. My carefully constructed walls were crumbling. The fortress was being dismantled, brick by painful brick, by the simple, unintentional intimacy of this moment. I was in a position of care, being tended to by him. The power dynamic, where he was the unapproachable sun and I the distant planet, had completely inverted. Here, on the floor of this tiny cabin, we were just two people. And one of them was holding the other's hand, gently, carefully, mending what was broken. He finished bandaging my hand, his movements efficient and sure. He looked up and his eyes met mine. His gaze held for a moment too long. The air crackled, the world shrank to the space between our faces, then he blinked and the moment was gone. He stood up, breaking the spell. "There," he said, his voice a little rough. "Good as new," but it wasn't, nothing was. Something had shifted, a tectonic plate deep beneath the surface of our friendship, and I had a terrifying feeling that the earthquake was still to come. That night the atmosphere in the cabin was different. The air was thick with a new kind of tension. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged. We were both acutely aware of each other, of the smallness of the space. Every accidental brush of our arms as we moved around the kitchen felt like a brand. Leo found a dusty bottle of whiskey in one of the cupboards. "Figured we earned this," he said, holding it up. I didn't drink much, but I nodded. Tonight, I needed something to numb the frantic energy thrumming just beneath my skin. We sat on the floor in front of the fireplace, passing the bottle back and forth. The whiskey was harsh, but it did its job, sanding the sharp edges off my anxiety, making me feel warm and loose. A dangerous state to be in around him. Outside, a storm rolled in. The wind howled and rain began to lash against the windows. The world outside the cabin ceased to exist. It was just us, the fire, the storm, and the whiskey. An intimate, isolated bubble. "Let's play a game," Leo said suddenly, his voice a low rumble. His eyes, fixed on me, were dark and unreadable in the firelight. "What game?" I asked, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs again. "Truth or dare," he said, a slow, challenging smile spreading across his face. "But with a twist, no backing out. You have to answer or you have to do the dare, no matter what." This was a terrible idea. My mind screamed it. A game designed for brutal honesty and reckless action was the last thing I needed, but the whiskey had made me bold. "Okay," I heard myself say. "You're on." He went first. "Truth." I scrambled for a question that was safe but not boring. "What's your biggest regret?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Staying in my hometown," he said finally, his voice soft. "I had a scholarship to a school out of state, turned it down to stay near, well, to stay. I always wonder what would have happened if I'd gone." It was another crack in the facade. Leo, Mr. Confident, had regrets. He had what-ifs. It made him feel more human, more real, and infinitely more dangerous to my heart. "My turn," he said, his gaze pinning me. "Truth or dare?" My throat was dry. Truth was a minefield. Every truth I owned about him was a confession I couldn't make. "Dare," I croaked. His smile widened. It was predatory. "I dare you," he began, drawing the words out, "to do the one thing you're most afraid of doing right now." I froze, the blood drained from my face. He couldn't know. He couldn't possibly know what that was. It was a trick question. A shot in the dark, but it hit its mark with terrifying accuracy. He was watching me, his expression a mixture of curiosity and something else, something intense and searching. He was waiting. The rules were no backing out. My mind was a hurricane. "He doesn't mean it. He thinks you're afraid of spiders or singing out of tune. He has no idea, but my body knew, my heart knew." It was hammering a frantic message against my ribs. This is it. The cliff's edge. Jump, I could feel the silence stretching, becoming a tangible thing. His dare hung in the air between us, a shimmering, impossible challenge. Years of silence, years of longing, years of watching from the sidelines. And then a different voice in my head, a quiet one I hadn't heard in a long time, whispered, "What if you did? What's the worst that could happen? You lose him. You're already losing him every day to a life you can't be a part of." My gaze dropped to his lips. I leaned forward. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch like taffy. I saw the surprise flicker in his eyes, the slight parting of his lips. He wasn't moving away. He wasn't stopping me. He was just watching, waiting. My own lips were trembling as I closed the small distance between us. The first contact was hesitant, soft, barely a touch. It was a question, not a statement. My entire being was coiled with tension, waiting for the rejection, the shove, the angry words. None of it came. Instead, after a beat of stunned stillness, I felt him respond. His lips moved against mine, a slow, tentative exploration. It wasn't frantic or passionate. It was quiet. It was deeply, shockingly honest. It tasted of whiskey and smoke and a decade of unspoken things. I brought my hand up, the uninjured one, and rested it on his jaw. His skin was rough with stubble. He was real. This was real. He deepened the kiss slightly, a sigh escaping him, and the sound shattered the last of my control. All the longing, all the pain, all the carefully hidden love I had for him poured into that kiss. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. It felt like breaking. It felt like everything. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. Neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the rain drumming against the roof. I searched his face for disgust, for anger, for regret. I saw none of it. I saw only a profound, bottomless confusion. He looked as stunned as I felt. "Sam," he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was just my name, but it held a universe of questions. Before I could answer, before I could ruin it with words, he leaned in and kissed me again. This time it was his choice, his initiation. And it sealed the terrifying, beautiful truth of what had just happened. I woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through the cabin window. For a blissful, disoriented second, I didn't remember where I was. Then, it all came rushing back. The whiskey, the dare, the kiss, the kisses. I was on the pull-out sofa, tangled in a thin blanket. The space next to me was empty. The cabin was silent, too silent. My stomach plummeted. A cold, heavy dread seeped into my bones. I sat up, my head pounding. I looked towards the bed. It was empty, the covers thrown back. Leo was gone. Panic, sharp and icy, clawed at my throat. He left. He woke up, realized what he'd done, and he left. The thought was a physical blow. I had ruined everything. I had taken his drunken dare and twisted it into something real, and it had terrified him. I had destroyed a decade of friendship in a single night. My heart, which had felt so full and alive just hours before, was now a shrunken, leaden thing in my chest. I was an idiot, a complete and utter fool for thinking that kiss meant anything more than a drunken mistake to him. I stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady. The cabin felt huge and empty now. The silence was an accusation. I saw his truck keys were gone from the hook by the door. That was it. Confirmation, he was gone. He'd probably walked for miles last night just to get a signal to call a cab to get away from me. The spiral of self-recrimination began. It was a familiar, ugly dance. I replayed the night, cringing at my own audacity. He dared me to face a fear, and I had turned it into a confession. I had forced my feelings on him, trapped him in this isolated cabin with my unwanted affections. Of course he ran. I would have run from me too. I sank onto the edge of the sofa, my head in my hands. The joy and wonder of the night before had curdled into shame and regret. The memory of his lips on mine was now a source of exquisite pain. Just as I was about to be completely consumed by my own misery, the cabin door opened. Leo stood there, framed by the misty morning light. He was wearing a damp sweatshirt, his hair slicked back with rain. He was holding 2 steaming mugs. He hadn't left. He had just gone for a walk or a run to the nearest place with coffee. He stopped when he saw me, his expression unreadable. The air between us was thick with the ghost of last night. The easy camaraderie of our friendship was gone, replaced by a fragile, terrifying uncertainty. He walked over and handed me a mug. Our fingers brushed. I flinched. He noticed. He didn't sit down. He just stood there looking out the window, his back mostly to me. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. It was worse than his absence had been. His presence was a constant, screaming reminder of what I had done. The drive home was agony. We barely spoke. The radio filled the silence with cheerful, meaningless songs that felt like a personal insult. Leo kept his eyes glued to the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I stared out the passenger window, watching the trees blur past, feeling like I was watching my life with him do the same. Every mile that passed was another nail in the coffin of our friendship. I had to fix it. I had to say something. I had to give him an out. Leo, I started, my voice sounding weak and foreign. About last night it was the whiskey, and the dare, it was stupid, I'm sorry, we can just forget it ever happened. He was silent for so long I thought he hadn't heard me. Then he spoke, his voice flat and hard. Can we? It wasn't the answer I expected. It wasn't an agreement, it was a question, and it hung there unanswered for the rest of the drive. He dropped me off at my apartment. See you, he said, not looking at me. Yeah, I mumbled and scrambled out of the truck as if it were on fire. I didn't look back as he drove away. I couldn't bear to. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. My apartment, my fortress of solitude, no longer felt safe. It felt like a prison. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was filled with the deafening absence of him. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat, only to crash back down when it wasn't his name on the screen. He didn't call. He didn't text. My former solitude, the one I had cultivated and clung to, was gone. It had been replaced by a sharp, aching loneliness. Before, I was just alone. Now I was alone without him. The distinction was everything. I convinced myself it was over. I had crossed a line and he had rightfully retreated. He was probably with Chloe right now, apologizing, reassuring her, laughing about his stupid, pathetic gay friend who couldn't take a hint. The thought made me physically ill. I mourned the loss of my best friend. The romantic part of me had always known it was a fantasy, but I never thought I would lose the friendship too. That was the one thing I thought was real, the one thing I thought was safe. And I had burned it to the ground for a single selfish kiss. On the third night I was curled up on my sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at a television screen when there was a knock on my door, a hard, insistent knock. My heart stopped, it couldn't be. I stumbled to the door, my hands trembling. I looked through the peephole, it was him. Leo stood in the hallway of my building, looking exhausted. He was wearing the same faded sweatshirt he'd had on at the cabin. His hair was a mess, like he'd been running his hands through it for days. He looked lost. I opened the door. We just stood there for a moment, staring at each other. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His eyes were shadowed, his face pale. The confident, easygoing Leo I knew was gone. In his place was this stranger, this man who looked as broken as I felt. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I nodded, stepping back to let him pass. He walked into the center of my living room and just stood there, looking around as if he'd never seen it before. I closed the door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it, the confrontation, the final, formal end to our friendship. He was here to tell me to stay away from him and Chloe, to tell me I had made him uncomfortable, to tell me goodbye. "I'm so sorry, Leo," I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "I never should have, I misread everything. I'll stay away, I promise. I won't make things weird." "Just please don't hate me." He turned to face me and his expression was one of pure anguish. "Stop," he said, his voice cracking. "Sam, just stop talking." He took a step towards me. "Do you think that's what this is about?" "Me hating you?" He let out a harsh, broken sound that might have been a laugh. "God, I wish it were that simple." He paced the small space of my living room, agitated, restless. "I went home," he said, not looking at me. "I went home and I saw Chloe and I felt nothing, less than nothing. It was like looking at a stranger who was planning our future, talking about weddings and houses, and all I could think about was," he stopped pacing. He looked right at me. His eyes were filled with a terrifying vulnerability. All I could think about was you, he whispered. The way you looked in the firelight, the taste of whiskey on your lips, the way you felt real. More real than anything has felt in years. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. This was not happening. I spent the last 2 days trying to convince myself it was a mistake, he continued, his voice raw with emotion. A drunken accident, a curiosity, but it wasn't, was it, Sam? I shook my head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. No, I whispered. He closed the distance between us, standing so close I could feel the heat coming off his body. I'm so scared, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I've spent my whole life on this one straight track, doing everything I was supposed to do, being the person everyone expected me to be. And in one night, you blew it all up. He looked down at my bandaged hand, still resting at my side. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the edge of the gauze. This is going to be a mess, he said, more to himself than to me. I have to, Chloe, you don't have to do anything, I said, finding my voice. Leo, we can still forget it, I meant it. I can go back to being your friend. He looked up and his eyes were fierce. No, you can't, he said, and I don't want you to, that's what I've realized. I don't want the friend who looks at me with sad eyes when he thinks I'm not watching. I don't want the polite silence. I don't know what I want, Sam, but I think it starts with this. And he kissed me. It was nothing like the first time. There was no hesitation, no whiskey-fueled haze. This was sober and deliberate and desperate. It was a kiss full of fear and confusion and a dawning, terrifying hope. It was the sound of a life detonating. It was the sound of a new one beginning. He broke it off with Chloe the next day. He told me it was quiet and sad and long overdue. He said she cried, but he thought it was more for the loss of the future she had planned than for the loss of him. I didn't ask for details. It was his past, his closure to find. The days that followed were strange and tentative. We were navigating a new world without a map. We were two friends who had known each other for a decade, but we were also two strangers learning how to hold hands. One evening, about a week later, he came over to my apartment. He didn't say anything, just walked in and handed me a single, newly cut key. It was warm from his hand. It's not a proposal, he said, stumbling over the words, a faint blush on his cheeks. It's just I don't want to have to knock anymore. A key, a small, serrated piece of metal. It was a promise, it was an invitation. It was a tangible act of commitment that spoke louder than any declaration of love. It was him saying, this is real, I'm not running away. I closed my hand around it, the metal biting into my palm. Okay, I said, my voice thick. And just like that, the new beginning started. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic change. It was a slow, quiet evolution. It was him leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom. It was me leaving a book at his place. It was falling asleep on the sofa watching a movie and him carrying me to bed. We started to build a new kind of routine, one that included two people. Mornings were the best. I'd wake up to the smell of coffee, a scent I now associated not with lonely workdays, but with him. He'd be in my kitchen, which suddenly seemed too small for his presence, moving with a comfortable domestic grace that made my heart ache in the best possible way. We would sit at my small kitchen table, the one that had only ever been set for one, and drink our coffee in a comfortable silence. It wasn't the heavy, awkward silence of the cabin. It was a peaceful, easy silence. The silence of two people who no longer needed words to fill the space between them. There was no more anxiety, no more fear of the morning after. I would wake up and he would be there, a solid, warm presence next to me. His arm would be thrown over my waist, holding me in place, and I would lie there, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, and feel a sense of peace I had never known. My life was no longer beige. It was splashed with the vibrant, chaotic colors of him. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the disruption that shattered my carefully constructed solitude and forced me to build something better in its place. He didn't just break down my walls, he walked through the rubble, took my hand, and led me out into the sun. I used to think that loving him from a distance was the only way to keep him. I thought my love was a secret to be guarded, a fragile thing that would be destroyed by the light. But I was wrong. It wasn't my secret that was fragile, it was my fear. He wasn't a sun to be orbited. He was just a man, full of his own doubts and regrets, looking for a place to feel real. And somehow, against all odds, that place was with me. I didn't find love by looking for it. It found me sitting right beside me all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for a stupid, drunken dare to give it a voice. He dared me to kiss him, and in doing so, we both dared to find out who we really were. And his girlfriend, she still has no idea that the end of her love story was the beginning of mine. Have you ever had a moment in your life that completely changed its direction? A single decision or a chance event that set you on a path you never could have imagined? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps more than you know.